Hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Come on in. Grab a comfy seat. Good to see you all here. I see some familiar faces, a lot of new faces. Welcome. We like to think of these fireside chats as if we're sitting in a big circle together, getting to hear a great conversation that you get to be a part of. So as we're all coming in, why don't you pop into the chat? Tell us where you're calling in from and who is the oldest person you've ever known. So where you're calling in from, what the oldest person, their name, and how old are they? Put that in the chat. I'd love to see. Your mother's 99, 103. Oh, great. Wow. And you're calling in from all over the world. Hello, Simbe, Tokyo. How many of you are here for the first time? Raise your hand. Oh, I love to see that. At the end of this call or near the end of this call, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So at that time, you can raise your reaction hand and we will bring you up. But in the meantime, and throughout the call, feel free to write your questions in the chat as well. So today's fireside chat is, what does the good life look like? And of course, we have MEA founder Chip Conley. Hi, Chip.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, I'm going to bring you guys up on Spotlight here. We've also got Carol Fishman Cohen.
Hi.
Yes, welcome. CEO and co-founder of iRelaunch. And then we'll also have Dr. Robert Waldlinger, who's a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, Zen priest, and director of the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It's one of the longest running studies of adult life ever conducted. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chip and Carol, and take it away. We'll keep an eye out for Robert.
He will be here soon. He's actually having a hard, I just saw a little note here that he's having a hard time getting onto Zoom. So first of all, this is perfect timing though, because Carol and I get to talk for a few minutes about iRelaunch and MEA, because some of you are here today because you are in the MEA community and some of you are in the iRelaunch community. And this is a great opportunity for us to get to know each other as two communities who have a lot in common. So Carol, I have long been a fan of yours and I was on your podcast recently, and tell us about your origin story about how iRelaunch came about, partly because of your own life.
Right. Well, I did live this before I started working on the whole concept of returning to work after taking a career break, and normalizing career breaks is the mission that we have at iRelaunch. So I was working at Drexel Burnham Lambert in the late 80s, and in 1990, Drexel collapsed while I was on maternity leave with my first child. So that began my career break. I didn't have a company to return to. I had 3 more kids. I was home with them for 11 years. And when I returned to work, it was in 2001, and I went back to the high yield debt group within Bain Capital. And the only reason I got that job is because there were ex-Drexel people there who remembered me from a dozen years before. So that was me first going through every stage of this process firsthand, in terms of how to return to work. Made mistakes along the way, learned things along the way. Later wrote a book about this topic, co-authored a book called Back on the Career Track, which came out in 2007. And then co-founded iRelaunch that same year, even though we started getting involved in working with companies to create career reentry programs starting around 2005, 2006. So that's
beautiful.
How it came to be.
And how, just a quick question for you, and then I'll tell a little bit of my story. How did COVID influence the idea of career breaks, taking them, like going on sabbatical, going on, and then coming back? What is it you're seeing there?
Well, certainly COVID made career breaks more common. At the height of the pandemic, 4.1 million people had withdrawn from the labor force. It was 2.8 1.8 men and 2.3 women, 2 million women and men. And that meant that recruiters were, and people generally at employers became more used to seeing career breaks than ever before, and seeing career breaks on resumes. So I think it did a lot to remove some stigma attached to taking career breaks, because it impacted so many people. The other thing that happened was, as a result of COVID, is how and where and when work got done completely got changed, and there were way more remote opportunities, and everything that we did at iRelaunch went remote. We used to run a big return to work conference in person, and overnight it went virtual, reaching many more people and becoming a national and even global event, as opposed to just in a metro area. So lots of changes as a result of COVID, and I think overall a positive for how comfortable recruiters and employers are with seeing a career break on a resume.
Well, that was an interesting little noise. I don't know where, maybe Dr. Waldlinger has shown up like with a, that sounded amazing. So thank you, Carol. Let me give a little bio of myself and MEA. And so, because there's a number of people on the call today who are not familiar with MEA and even think it's MMA, but no, it's not MMA, it's MEA. And what is it? What do they call the wrestling? What is that? Or like,
oh yeah,
WWA.
It's mixed martial arts.
Yeah, WWF.
Mixed martial arts. We are not mixed martial arts. That is not why people are here today. So if you came here looking for a little bit of mixed martial arts, we're actually MEA, also known as the Modern Elder Academy. And my origin story was I became, at age 52, the modern elder at Airbnb. That's what they started to call me 11 years ago, when they wanted me to come in and help them take their little tech startup and turn it into a global hospitality brand. And it was a fascinating journey, because it was all about intergenerational collaboration and understanding what does it mean to be in midlife and surrounded by millennials. And I ended up writing a book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. While I was writing that book down here in Mexico at a beachfront home that I had down here, I had this Baha aha one day, an epiphany, which was, why is it that we don't help people in midlife? And midlife defined broadly. So sociologists now define midlife, many of them, as 35 to 75, which is a really long period. But most people in midlife would consider it maybe 45 to 65. How are we helping people in that era reimagine and repurpose themselves? So very much in line with what Carol's work and Carol's organization, iRelaunch, does. And so we started creating the world's first midlife wisdom school, MEA, and with a campus down here in Mexico on the beach. And then soon in March, our first campus in Santa Fe, New Mexico, 2,600 acre regenerative horse ranch. So we're very excited about that. So that is the origin story. And we've had about 3,500 alumni now from 42 countries. And we have 26 regional chapters around the world. So all good. And we have a lot of folks here. And I hear that Robert is here in the room. There he is right there. Robert, do you mind if I call you Bob?
Please call me Bob. I'm so sorry. Zoom just kept not letting me in, and then finally, randomly, it did.
Well, you know what? It's like the bouncer at the bar. You know, they don't think you're cool enough to get in, but you are cool enough, my friend. This is Carol. Carol's going to join us back on stage in about 10 minutes or so, and I'm going to start asking you some questions, Bob, if that's okay.
Sure. Now that I'm cool enough, absolutely.
You're definitely cool enough. Well, let's start by the cool part, because for those who don't know it, Bob is actually he's a Zen priest. He's a longtime Buddhist practitioner, beyond just being a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, and director of the Harvard Study on Adult Development. I just want to hear your perspective on how you have incorporated mindfulness and why mindfulness snuck up on you and said, hey, I need to be in your life. Tell us a little bit about that to start with.
Okay. Well, it's Zen. It's not just mindfulness is sort of a technique.
Yeah.
Zen is really a whole view of existence that includes meditation and mindfulness. But I had always been captivated by Buddhist philosophy. It was the worldview that made the most sense to me, as opposed to the monotheistic religions that I was raised on. So, and then one day I stumbled into a Unitarian church for a young guy's coming of age ceremony, and the minister was also a Zen master. And so I got to know him and decided, gee, it would be great to study Zen with him. And that was my deep dive a bunch of years ago.
How long ago was that?
2005. So
Okay.
yeah, 18 years ago.
We had, Roshi Joan Halifax.
Yeah.
She was on with us about, oh gosh, maybe a month ago, a little over a month ago. What a lovely lady. And we're going to get to know her well in Santa Fe because we're moving, we're going to have a second campus open in Santa Fe.
Wow.
Yeah, so she's wonderful. Tell us about this 85-year study and like just a little bit of the background. And just so everybody knows, Bob's book came out in January, went up to the top of the New York Times bestsellers list, has stayed on bestselling lists for months because I don't know that there's any book this year that has been more cited in more articles because there's so many elements to the study and the book that you wrote with, is it Marc Schulz?
Marc Schulz, yeah.
Who you've had for 25 years now, a Friday afternoon conversation every Friday as
Every
a ritual.
Friday.
I want you to tell us a little bit about the history before you ever got involved. And then maybe give us just some, a hint of the number one lesson you've learned so far and that you've brought up in your book.
Sure. So this is the longest study of the same people that's ever been done. It started 85 years ago, 1938, with two groups that didn't even know about each other, a group of Harvard undergrads, 19-year-old sophomores, and a group of boys from Boston's poorest neighborhoods, and not just poorest neighborhoods, but most troubled families. And both were studies of thriving, like how do people stay on good developmental paths? So a very privileged group and a very underprivileged group. And of course, now we realize that if you want to study thriving and adult development, you don't just study white men, right? So we brought in women and we brought in, so we have balanced ourselves out, at least gender-wise, studied all their children. But it's the same families. And so we know, like, we can look at threads of how lives play out over decades and then over generations. And that's what's unusual. Most studies of adult life are snapshots of at one moment in time. So that's what's rare about us.
So the age of the first folks is 104 now, approximately?
Well, okay. There were 724 original people, about 35 are still living. They're in their late 90s and early 100s.
Okay, got it.
And their kids are all baby boomers. Their kids are, average age 65.
Yeah. So in terms of your lessons, you've helped create a new term, or a term that I wasn't familiar with before, called social fitness.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I've heard you say, and I just want to make sure I'm getting this right, is the number one variable for people who are happy and healthy in their 80s and beyond was how much had they invested in their relational capital, their social relations in their 50s. Is that accurate? And tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, what we began to find was that the people who were more connected with other people, they weren't just happier, they lived longer, and they stayed healthier longer. They had more years of good quality life. They didn't get the diseases of aging as soon as the people who were more isolated, more self-absorbed, as well. And also that their brains stayed sharper. And at first we didn't believe it because we thought, well, it makes sense you'd be happier if you had better relationships, but how could it be more likely that you would be free of coronary artery disease, or you wouldn't get type 2 diabetes? Like, how could that even be a thing? And then more studies began to find the same thing. And you need different studies to point in the same direction so that you can have confidence that a finding is real, that it's not just a fluke of our group of people. So and now it's a well-established fact that people who invest more in other people stay healthier longer, and they're happier.
And your book is really chock full of great suggestions and tips and practices for how people can do that.
Yeah. And stories. Like what we did was we followed some of the stories of our people. We disguised them so that they, to maintain their privacy, but they're real stories of the real people as they went through their lives.
If there was a biggest surprise for you, what would it be in terms of understanding this cohort of people over the course of time?
Yeah.
And if your biggest surprise was the social fitness piece, what's your second biggest surprise?
Well, the second biggest surprise was that the Harvard people weren't happier than the inner city people. So the Harvard people were way wealthier and they had access to many more resources, but the inner city folks ended up as a group being as happy, as fulfilled. And partly it was because there was good social mobility. So these people, by and large, were able to live middle-class lives as they grew up. And we know once you get your basic needs met, and you have food security and housing and healthcare, all that's all you need for basic levels of happiness. And so I think what we really appreciated was that, going to Harvard wasn't the ticket. And here I am, I'm a Harvard professor, but, I can guarantee you some of the most unhappy people in the world are at Harvard. And some of the happiest people in the world are not privileged at all. That said, having resources matters. So I don't mean to say, it's all fine if you're poor and under-resourced. No, absolutely not. But that what we found was that, for example, wealth and fame and high achievement, that did not make people happier.
So I have a last question before I bring Carol on, and she's going to ask you some questions as well. What are the practices that you most believe in that help to sustain happiness? If it's true that wealth and finances beyond a certain point aren't going to be the determinant of happiness, what is it? Is it gratitudinous? Is it having some kind of spiritual practice? What would you recommend?
Well, there are a bunch of things, like those things you mentioned. It turns out that I used to think gratitude practice was really hokey, and then I realized, no, it actually works. So for example, that when we are conditioned to be vigilant for what's wrong in our lives, and actually that's quite adaptive. Like evolutionarily, you're more likely to survive if you scan the horizon and you see the threats out there, but it's not good for keeping us happy. And so what they find is that when you actually call to mind the things that are okay, the things that are right, the things that are not wrong, that we get happier. And so gratitude practice works. Spiritual practice, it turns out, works for many people. Not everybody, but for many people, it really sustains them, makes them happier. For some people, it is spending a lot of time in the natural world. So one size doesn't fit all. For my wife, it's playing the piano. So I think what it is it's finding the practices that really absorb you and make you feel connected to what you're doing, connected to the present moment. That's what I would suggest that people seek out.
That flow state that Mahali Csikszentmihalyi talked about.
Yes.
That is one of those things we study and talk about at MEA, at the Modern Elder Academy. So Carol, join us back on stage here. And Carol's got, so iRelaunch, as we talked about earlier, is a program dedicated to helping people to come back into the workplace, take a break, come back into the workplace, and to have companies realize that actually having people come back into the workplace, these people are actually sometimes the hungriest, smartest, and most adept at multitasking, because often they're women who've been raising a family while doing a few other things too. So Carol, feel free to ask Bob some questions.
All right, thanks, Chip, and hi, Bob. It's
Carol.
great to have the opportunity to speak with you. Because I'm very focused on careers and career paths, wanted to ask you a question about regarding relationships, about work relationships and the benefits of having close colleagues at work, and then what happens to those relationships when we go on career break or when we retire.
Yeah. Well, so let me talk about something that I know, Carol, you would be very familiar with, which is that Gallup survey of 15 million workers. And the survey asked, do you have a best friend at work? And what they meant was, is there somebody at work you can talk to about personal things in your life? Only 30% of people had a best friend at work, but those 30% were not just happier at work, they were better workers. They earned more. They were less likely to leave their jobs. They were less likely to get injured on the job, right? So many reasons why having a best friend at work is a huge help, not just for the person involved, but for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing they found was that the 70% who don't have a friend at work, most of them, the great majority, say they feel pretty checked out at work. And that's really sad because we spend a lot of our waking life at work. Those are precious hours that we're never going to get back. So hugely important to foster good connections at work. The other thing that the Gallup organization found was that half of CEOs say they feel lonely much of the time at work. So it's at all levels of organizations. So that said, to your question, Carol, about retirement, what we found was that the people who were happiest in retirement were, as we've said, the people who replaced their workmates with new playmates. That the people who don't fare well, who are the people who retire, who go home, who pick their heads up and say, where's everybody? And they just hang out by themselves. That isolation, after having all these people around us, turns out to be bad, not just for happiness, but for health. So all the ways that I think, that like Modern Elder Academy gets people to invest again in the world, right? And or stay invested, that these are prescriptions for happiness and health. And that what we found certainly in our longitudinal study was that many of, particularly the men who had traditional World War II generation careers, worked and worked and worked, and then they retired and they went home, and that was it. These were people who died early. These were people who were really unhappy, who drank too much. That this disconnection that can happen is really something we want to combat in retirement. And there are ways to do that.
Did you see people unretire after retiring? Or I know when in talking to Chip about sort of thinking about your future, maybe they took on a portfolio of different things they were doing, but somehow unretiring. And did that help solve some of these problems?
It did. Unretiring helped. Also finding a new purpose. Some people finding things discovering new things that they love to do, or getting back to old things. One guy went on the stage and started doing community theater, which he had to put aside during his busy career. And then he was just as happy as could be doing one play after another. So there were many ways to do it. You don't have to develop a new work portfolio necessarily, But I think that there's a big study, the Health and Retirement Survey out of University of Michigan. And what they find is that particularly in retirement, people need to feel like they still matter in the world. Now that could be being with your grandchildren. Mattering could be teaching English as a second language. Mattering could be so many different things, or working to prevent climate change. So it really is finding that reason to get up in the morning that I think we all need. And whether that's through additional work activities in our portfolio or, discovering pickleball. I mean, there are people who get passionate about pickleball, as we know, and
Right.
more power
I
to
played
them.
pickleball with my sons yesterday here in Baja.
Yeah.
It was joyous.
That's
Not just older people play pickleball. An 11 and an 8-year-old were playing pickleball with me. So back to you.
Fabulous. And I was just on Cape Cod, and the Cape Cod Repertory Company is doing a play that's about a highly dramatic controversy in a pickleball league. So it's seeping into the culture in many ways.
Wow. Let me just follow up with something you said about people finding these new things that they're interested or going back to something they had always wanted to spend time doing. Is part of it that they need to have some kind of an elevator pitch for when people say, oh, you're retiring, so what are you going to do in retirement? And there are some people who have to have something to say, and so they figure it out early, maybe prematurely. And then there are other people who are comfortable saying, I don't know yet, and they're still in exploration. Do you see that?
We do see that. And I think it varies. I think some people are more comfortable with uncertainty and can be in that space, and it's okay. Life, one of the things that some of the people who write about and study life transitions talk about is that place where you've left something behind, but you don't know what's next. And for some people, that's okay. They can live in that space for a while. And for some people, they panic. And so for some people, they need to plan ahead. Monday morning, my first weekday being retired, I've got these 12 activities planned. And for other people, no, I'm going to take a year to find myself, right? And so I think a lot depends on our tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some people will say they start out not having a plan, and then all of a sudden it's like, it's Wednesday at 11 o'clock. What am I doing? And that propels them into accelerating that process of figuring out what they want to do.
Yeah. And I think, again, I know you both find this, that one path doesn't fit everybody, right? That there's so many different paths to finding what your next act is. And a lot of that has to do with your personal temperament, with your life experience, with who you have around you. My wife is working frantically. She's like a really busy practitioner in her mid-60s. So, for her, it's for better or for worse, but not for lunch. We've got to, we got to be busy. For other partnerships, they're both happy being totally retired and playing pickleball.
Yeah, Chip, I bet you see all of this in Modern Elder Academy with all the different people in the community.
Yeah, no, it's liminality. I see a lot of people putting the word liminal in the meeting chat, and we sort of specialize in liminality. The fact is, a lot of people feel like just because they're going through a lot of transitions in midlife, and our average age of people who come to MEA is about 54, but we've had people as young as 28 and as old as 88. Jim Flaherty, who's on this call, is 87, and he came to MEA and learned how to surf at 87. Yes.
Wow.
Hats off to that guy. So yeah, there's a weird feeling that somehow if you're going through a liminal stage in your 40s, 50s, 60s, or 70s, or later, that you're getting the game of life wrong, when in fact life is liminal. Dan Gilbert's work at Harvard, speaks to this. It's like we really underestimate how much change is going to be ahead of us And yet we don't really have schools for midlifers to understand how to do it. What are the schools and tools and the rites of passage and rituals? And that's, I think, part of what iRelaunch and MEA are trying to do in our own ways, is to help people have some confidence and some tools, and to also realize that there's other people going through this as well. You're not the only one who's going through something like this.
And to let people know that they're not failing at life if they're in this uncertain space. There's a Joseph Campbell quote that I love. He said, if the path before you is clear, you're probably on somebody else's path. And that we're always finding our way, right?
Yeah.
And it's never quite like anybody else's way.
I want to be you when I grow up. Can I be you when I grow up, Bob?
No.
I know that's the right answer.
No.
A lot of us sort of say, oh, that's the path. I like what he did, or I like what she did.
Right. I'll have what she's having.
Yeah.
But there's a saying in Zen, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And what that means is, if you're meeting somebody who you want to worship, right, and you think has it all figured out, get rid of that. That's a mirage.
Yeah.
There ain't nobody who's got it all figured out all the time.
Yeah, beautiful. Carol, maybe one more question, and then I'll ask one last one. In a moment, we're going to actually allow all of you, and we have almost 400 of you here, and we had 1,300 people sign up for this. So Bob, you're popular.
Well, what happened to the other 900 people? Where did they
go? They'll watch the recording later.
Okay.
That's how it works these days. So if you want to ask a question of Bob, feel free to use the reactions function at the bottom of the screen, and raise your hand, as Lydia just did. So Carol's going to ask a question, I'm going to ask a question, and then we're going to go to Lydia and others, hopefully. Carol.
Okay, so on the other side of retiring and unretiring, did you find that some people just hesitate to retire because of this fear of becoming irrelevant and losing their work relationships?
They do. Some people, in fact, I work at Mass General Hospital in Boston, which is one of the busiest medical centers. And we see doctors, I see doctors still walking around in their 90s, not looking like happy campers. But many of them will tell you they don't know what else they would do. And my hope is that for most of us, we have enough imagination and enough help from other people, like MEA perhaps, that we don't need to do that. We don't need to stay on one path out of fear, no matter what. Some of our people did that.
Beautiful. Let me ask one last question, and then we'll go to Lydia for the first question from our audience. So Bob, what's been your biggest surprise about yourself in the last 10 years? Oh. There's a wonderful quote from Kevin Spacey in American Beauty at the end, and he says something to the effect, and of course he's gone through his midlife crisis, and he's had a bad movie, and he says something to the effect that the most important thing for us to do in our lives is to constantly surprise ourselves. Yeah. What's been your biggest surprise the last few years? And really, I mean, another thing people don't know is that you've had over 40 million people watch your TED Talk. So I know you've become pretty famous, and you don't strike me as somebody who had that as an aspiration.
No, that's probably the biggest surprise. It's like I gave that TED Talk in a little elementary school auditorium in suburban Boston. And I thought we were going to get a few thousand views on the local YouTube channel, and that would be it. And then it blew up. And again, it's this idea that we just don't know what's going to happen in our lives. And I think that's been the biggest surprise. I think another big surprise is that as I get older, the parts of my life that I thought were disparate, like my Zen life and my research life, seem much more connected than I ever thought they were. And that it's all one life, right? And that's actually so grounding and reassuring to me, that I'm not feeling like I have to keep things separate like I used to.
At MEA, we like to say we are growing old, but we're also growing whole.
Yeah.
Growing whole means that we become, as we get older, expert alchemists. The polarities in our lives, the introversion, the extroversion, the curiosity, the wisdom, the gravitas, the levity, we know how to we own every age we've ever been, and we know how to sort of incorporate them into this holistic being that is, is not so compartmentalized as we were when we were younger.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense. It certainly is what it's felt like for me to be getting older.
Well, let's go on to some questions. We got a lot of questions here, so we're going to keep it brief. So if you want to say something more editorial, say it briefly and then go to the question, but prefer to go just to the question. Lydia, it's so good to see you. Where are we finding you?
I'm in Saint-Sulpice, Switzerland, house sitting for friends. Tomorrow I'm up to Paris for some work. Question is single people. So I know one of the big findings has been around partners make people happy. And when I came upon your work in my late 40s, I thought, ooh, I'm in trouble. Single, never married. I'm now 60. So for the past 12 years, I have lived without a physical home, and I've spent my time doing work all over the world, but living with my friends and their families in between. It's been the best investment.
Yeah.
What are you doing with single people in your studies these days?
Well, first of all, the world is filled with single people and many, many happy single people, right? That what we're finding is that it's not a marriage license. It's not having an intimate partnership that you need, a romantic partnership. It's close connections, right? That's what we find, that in fact, for many of our people, their closest connections weren't the people they lived with. They were other people. So it's really about the quality of some very close connections that seem to confer both the happiness benefit and the health benefit. So I'm really glad you asked that, because we can give the impression that you need to have a marriage license, and that is so not the truth in terms of our research findings or anybody's research findings.
Thank you, Bob. Sally, where are you calling in from? Oops, you may be muted.
Hi, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm actually in Golden, Colorado, and I work with iRelaunch and actually have my own position at one of our national laboratories as an intern returning. And what I found is I'm in my mid-50s and I actually work with interns, and the ageism, the way that I identify myself as like a project manager before I left the workforce and then returning to the workforce, I'm treated so differently. And my expectation was I was going to come in and kind of return to my old life. And I love your comments on about how there's a way in which I can see ageism preferring the younger generations, and how I have to detach from my expectation of being treated the way I was when I was a professional before. And I'm not sure if that's the healthiest move. I'm really struggling and would love to hear your advice on, do I let go of my previous self or the self I know to be so that I can take advantage of this return to work opportunity? Because that's what seems to be asked of women who are returning to work in certain situations. It's really a strange dynamic, and I'll just be quiet because it's a big,
Well, can I ask you, Sally, can I ask you briefly, what are you supposed to let go of? Very briefly, like what?
Well,
what?
I guess I'm finding that I identified myself with my role and my ego and my self-esteem. And so I had a lot of identity in that. And coming back to work, I see that the workforce doesn't see me that way anymore.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating. It's a fabulous inquiry, but I can't say that I find any skills or how to deal with that.
So and I think you're right. It's the difference between a role and who you are. So there's this great comment. It's a woman who was talking about her Buddhism, and she said, "My parents hate it when I'm a Buddhist, but they love it when I'm a Buddha." And what I'm wondering about is, if you are just the Sally who has a whole lot of life experience, and you just operate that way in your workplace, is it more likely that they will discover, oh, wow, hey, this person has some stuff to teach here? That it may not be something you declare, but simply something you live into, and that people discover that? Or is that too Pollyanna-ish on my part?
No, I find that I'm able to do that personally, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to keep me in a secure position,
Oh, I
because
see.
it
Yeah.
seems that those two things are not always in alignment.
Yeah.
It's a bigger, like I say, it's a bigger issue than I want to get into here, but I just am really curious about how other people, because it's these two conversations we're having today: returning to work after a gap, being seen in a different light when you identify yourself in a different way, hanging on to your goals and values and bringing that, but then really dealing with what ageism and how perhaps the workforce sees you in a different way. It's just fascinating questions. I really appreciate that the dialogue is even happening today. So,
Yeah.
Carol, anything you want to add to that? If you have any thoughts.
A couple things. We've always said that subject matter expertise is the antidote to ageism, and that if you become an expert in your field all over again, people are going to pay more attention to the substance of what you're talking about than how old you are or how long your career break was. So that's one thing. And the other thing, what Sally's talking about is our society attaches so much importance to our identity in terms of what we do for work, that when you take that away, that's why you can feel a diminished sense of self the longer you're on career break. And when you come back to work, reconnecting, but at this different point in life, can be complicated. Some people love that they have that they had that relationship again and they can say what they do, and others have some ambivalence about it.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say, Sally, is in my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, I go through a lot of detail about how do you own your wisdom? How do you show up with invisible productivity? One of the things we talk about as we get older is we become invisible, and women particularly feel this. But what if you actually were the person in the organization who actually makes everybody else around them better at what they do? And there's growing research on this, and you can find it in the book, that allows us as older people to say to someone we're interviewing with for a job, or someone we're working with, I'm not competing with you. I'm here to actually make you better, and that's part of my job. And I think that the more we can think that way, the more we're sort of taking on Erik Erikson's perspective, the developmental psychologist, of I am what survives me. And that is such a beautiful feeling when you know that your influence in the world is, not with a name on a building, but with a mentee, maybe even an informal one, who just sort of felt like I got smarter or wiser just because I was in their presence. Let's go to Susanna.
Hi, I'm from the UK. So yeah, my personal experience of hitting midlife was burnout and a complete loss of identity. Didn't really know who I was anymore, but the systems that I worked within were not human-centered, and I couldn't thrive in those environments. And I see so many people facing the same challenges. I mean, the last lady, it seems like the systems around her are not being kind. So my question is, I'm quite interested in new models of business that are human-centered, that are regenerative. What can you give any examples of that in practice today, obviously apart from the Modern Elder Academy? And if you were to walk into an industry or a business that was dysfunctional in this way and wasn't supporting growth throughout the different stages of life, what advice would you give them? What would you say that they had to change?
Well, I think one of the things, some of the best research comes out of business schools, actually, that that look at how culture does change, and what they find is that it can't just start in the human resources department of a large organization. It has to start really at the top, right? And that a lot of it has to do with leadership allowing themselves to be vulnerable, to share things about themselves, not wearing hearts on sleeves all the time necessarily, but really, really being more vulnerable, being more personal, and modeling that it's okay to do that, to ask for help, not just to give help, but to receive help, to need help, right? To not be self-sufficient. And a model that I really like, our Surgeon General in the US, Vivek Murthy, instituted something in his weekly staff meeting where he had one staff member each week spend the first 5 to 10 minutes just talking about something about their personal life that they wanted to talk about. And people loved it. The staff just couldn't get enough of it. And it sparked all these conversations outside of the meetings about, oh, I didn't know you were interested in that, or I didn't know you were dealing with that in your life as well. And so what you find is that when the leader models this kind of behavior, culture can change. But it really, the idea is it really has to start from the people who have the most power and influence.
Big old job for it's a job too big for many.
It is, but I think I think there's a lot of progress. I think the idea of regenerative leadership, and if you know, Google that, and somebody here was writing about that in the chat.
Yeah, that was me.
Oh, there you go. Regenerative leadership is a thing, and it's getting more attention. And I would just, I think for those who are interested in this, the question is, how do we create a world in which regenerative leaders are seen as the successful leaders of the future? Thank you so much, Susanna. Senbei in Tokyo or in Japan, what time is it there right now?
Now is before 6 o'clock morning.
Okay.
Wow.
Thank you for being here, an MEA alum. What's your question, Senbei?
Yeah. Thank you very much for today. And I'm very happy to be here because the Japanese version, The Good Life, is published in this June, and I bought it and I'm very impressed this book. Yeah, thank you very much. And so there was a section where toward the end of this book, there was a section what Andrew's life changed dramatically after he turned over 60 years old. And so I'm already 6 years old, modern elder. What is the most important next action for us, for my ages people, do you think, Dr. Waldlinger?
Well, it is. I mean, that example that you talked about from the book was a man who found friends for the first time, really for the first time in his life, in his 60s. He found this little tribe at a gym, but they began to connect in lots of other ways, not just working out. And, you know, I think that it's finding both the activities that mean something to us and people that we care about and investing in those. So it's investing in both the activities and in the people that we care about. It's a kind of combination, if we're lucky, of having both. When many people feel less connected and they feel like they don't have something that gets them up in the morning. So it's finding that. And I hope, Senbei, that you're finding that as a modern elder in Japan.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, what's interesting about Japan and Korea and many Asian cultures, but actually Japan and Korea are quite specific to this, is they see 60 years old as the second childhood. It's the kanriki. Is it called kanriki, Senbei?
Pardon?
Is it kanriki? The idea of when you turn 60?
Yes, right. 60 years old. Kanreki. Yes.
Kanriki. And so I think one of the things we need to look at in the US in particular is how do we create new rituals that help people to say life begins at 50 or life begins at 60. And there's an element of like, oh, this is not about just growing old. It's about actually having a newfound beginning in many ways in one's life. Because, you know, you have, in some ways we have some time affluence as we get older. Let's go to Diana.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful discussion. And I'm really curious to know if you observed any people that got into their 80s, 90s, and even onto 100. And did you see some wisdom in ways that they coped with losing a lot of the people that they cared about before their time came? It's
Yeah.
something that I've experienced it young, and I see it. I have a beautiful network of friends. It continues to grow, but my older friends tell me how hard that is. So I'm curious if you learned anything or observed anything.
Well, we did, and we observed that, it's so real, this loss, that we lose people as we get older, and it is really hard. There is, there's no silver lining to loss,
right?
But at the same time, what we found was that the people who were more active in sustaining new connections, for example, and the current relationships they had, that those people were able to get by. And one of the, we had one person in our study who said that, he was traveling across the country. He was in his late 80s, and he was traveling across the country to see some of his old friends. He said they're getting quite elderly. They're in their early 90s. So I really
gotta go.
So it was kind of a mindset of, I'm here. I need to take care of my friends. I need to take care of my relationships.
Right.
So he kept a mindset that was not a mindset of withdrawing from the world. It was a very engaged mindset.
That makes a lot of sense.
And Becca Levy's work from Yale on this is really interesting, where she's been able to show that when people actually shift from a negative to a positive mindset on aging, they gain 7.5 years of additional life.
Yeah.
Which is more life than if you actually stopped smoking at 50 or started exercising at age 50. So the shift in mindset and how we reframe our relationship with aging is really important. Janet, let's go to you.
There we go. Thank you so much for bringing in that element of the disparate elements of life coming together. That's been my experience too. And I really enjoy that going more whole instead of scattered out between my work and my home. I don't see my partner having that same experience. And I wondered, Robert, if you have some stories or advice about what facilitates the partners getting on the same kind of path, which relates also to what you just said, Chip, about the negative to positive mindset about growing older. I'm a gerontologist myself, and I've kind of identified with the older crowd since I was 30. And I don't think my partner has the same attitude.
Well, right. And I think it is so different for each of us. It may be that your partner has different images of aging, I think you've spent your life with people who are older, and you've seen probably lots of very vigorous people who maintain their interest in the world. Perhaps your partner hasn't had that. Perhaps your partner has different associations. Well, because we all grow up. The first associations we have with older people are often when we're tiny children, could be with grandparents or neighbors. And those images really imprint on us. So it may be hard to change those. So there's a sense of, wait, why doesn't my partner see things the same way I do? It may be something that's just very particular to each of us in a certain way. Whether that can change might depend on whether your partner can find things that are energizing, that are, that light them up. And maybe they haven't found that yet.
Send your partner to MEA. Send your partner to MEA.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. That sounds like a wonderful idea. He does report having had a very grumpy grandmother live with him when he was quite young. So I can see that now in a context. And we have befriended people 20 years older than we are who are vital and excited about life. And hopefully he's replacing expectations with those role models.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. We have only got five minutes left. So we have 4 people here in line. I'm sorry, we're not probably going to get to all of you. Jeff, a 1-sentence question.
I will be quick. Thank you to everyone for this meaningful discussion. My question is something that I'm working on, and so are many of my clients. Do you have any thoughts on how we could work to separate our self-identity from our previous careers so that it would allow us to grow and evolve without being defined by our past?
Well, I think the question is, who's defining you that way? I mean, and can you be with people who didn't know you in that role? I mean, it could be finding some new folks, not replacing the old ones, but finding some people who don't know you as that, who know you just for who you are right now. And really, you could also make it a point to show these people, your familiar people, all the new things in your life, the ways that you are different. But I know, because I'm a physician, so many people expect that I'm going to want to hear about their ailments, no matter what. And I don't always. I want to do other things, so I get it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Quick question.
Hi, Bob. A question. I'm a psychologist. I've been a psychologist for 60 years. I'm 82 years old. I'm very active, and it's probably the happiest time of my life. And you had a sentence in your book where you called happiness something about a happiness self point. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Oh, a happiness set point. Yes.
Set point.
What they find, it's other research, not ours, but the research finds that we all kind of do have a baseline of happiness, and we know this, right? Like, people who are just grumpy, no matter how good life is. And people who are happy no matter what's happening, they're just cheery. And that seems to have something to do with our inborn temperament, as we know. And what they find is that we can move that set point up or down by some of the things we do, right? Like gratitude practice, many things, spiritual practice, many things, but that we do have that set point, and that's just a part of the variation of being human, right? That people just show up in different ways. But that said, so I'm thinking about Laura Carstenson's work, the Stanford psychologist, who finds that we get happier as a species, we get happier as we get older. And so even our set points get a little bit higher on average as we get older.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it was in your book or in one of Laura's books or one of her talks. They said that the happiest year of one's life is 82. So
well, there you go.
I can confirm that.
I think the point of that, Dick, is the happiest time of your life is this year, whatever year you are. There you go.
Yes. As Pete said, what day is it? It's today. Happiest day of the world.
Absolutely.
So
thank you.
I want to say to Linda and Eileen, I'm so sorry that we can't get to your questions, just because it is the top of the hour and I want to respect Bob's time as well as Carol's. Wow, that was a lot in an hour. This is recorded, and so it will come to you as a recording. And for those of you who were not able to be here live, it will come to you. Feel free to share it with others. We are here for you. And Bob, what an inspiration you are. I just love you. I just really want to say, I don't want to be you when I grow up. I want to be me when I grow up, but I actually want to be like you. I want to have some of the qualities that I see in you. And you, how old are you, Bob?
I'm 72.
Yeah, so you're 10 years older than me, and I can say that you have qualities that I want to grow into. So, and you're a good example of an old growth human, not just an old growth forest, but an old growth human.
Well, I am feeling like old growth, but this was a pleasure. I'm really enjoying this, and I think what you guys are doing is fabulous. So thank you for including me in it.
Yes, and Carol, thank you so much. Our missions are very complimentary, and it's just a joy to have you here.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you, Carol.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Aw.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.